Every night, my stage became my sanctuary. Under the glow of the spotlight, I was just James Harper, a middle-aged comedian with a knack for spinning life's quirks into something worth laughing about. No matter how chaotic my day had been, the stage was where I found clarity. It was my escape, my therapy, and my livelihood rolled into one. The audience knew me for my relatable humor, but what really resonated was the way I talked about my wife, Laura. She was my muse, my anchor, my partner in every sense of the word. Her quirks were legendary among my fans, the way she hated olives but loved martinis, how she could never finish a movie without falling asleep, and the way she'd sneak the last piece of cake and deny it with crumbs still on her lips. Every bit was a love letter wrapped in a punchline. "You're so lucky," fans would tell me after shows. "Your marriage sounds perfect." And for the longest time, I believed it too. But now I know better. The first crack in the illusion appeared 6 months ago, and it came at me sideways. I had just finished a gig at a comedy club downtown, the kind of dimly lit dive where the beer is cheap, and the laughter flows freely. As I packed up my props and notes, a woman approached me. She looked vaguely familiar, maybe a fan who'd been to a show or two. She smiled warmly and said, "Laura was a hit at the bar tonight. Everyone loved her stories." I froze mid-reach for my bag. "Stories?" I echoed, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Yeah," she said, laughing. "She's got this energy, you know. She had the whole place in stitches." My heart did a funny little flip. Laura wasn't supposed to be at the bar. She wasn't even supposed to be near the club. When I'd left earlier that evening, she was curled up on the couch with a blanket and a novel, claiming she needed a quiet night to herself. She had kissed me on the cheek and told me to knock em dead. "Are you sure it was my wife?" I asked, forcing a chuckle to mask the unease creeping up my spine. The woman tilted her head, looking puzzled. "Oh, definitely. She even said how proud she was of your set tonight. You're lucky to have someone so supportive." Supportive. The word stuck in my throat. I nodded and thanked her, keeping my expression polite, but inside, my thoughts were racing. My wife hated noisy bars and rarely drank more than a glass of wine. It didn't add up. When I got home, I found Laura exactly as I'd left her, blanket draped over her lap, book open on her knees. She looked up at me with her trademark smile, the one that used to make my heart skip a beat. "Hey, how was the show?" she asked, her voice warm and casual. "Good," I said, watching her closely. "Just the usual crowd." "How was your night?" She shrugged, turning a page. "Quiet. Finished my book." I wanted to ask her outright, "Were you at the bar?" But something stopped me. Maybe it was the ease with which she lied, or maybe it was my own fear of hearing an answer I couldn't handle. So, I swallowed the words and kissed her goodnight, pretending everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew roots faster than I could manage. Laura had always been the love of my life, the one constant in the unpredictable chaos of my career. I had built my life, and my act, around her. To think that she could lie to me so easily made my chest ache in a way I wasn't prepared for. Over the next few weeks, I tried to shake it off. Maybe the fan had been mistaken. Maybe Laura had gone to the bar and decided not to mention it, no harm, no foul. But the more I tried to convince myself, the harder it became to ignore the little things. The way she'd tilt her phone screen when I walked into the room. The sudden late-night errands that couldn't wait until morning. The faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine lingering on her scarf. One night, I came across an old photo of us from our early days. We were at a diner, laughing over milkshakes, our heads pressed close together. The joy on her face was so real, so unguarded, it nearly brought me to tears. When had that version of us disappeared? And why hadn't I noticed it slipping away? The turning point came during one of my gigs at a theater uptown. It was a bigger crowd, the kind of venue where I could experiment with new material. My set went off without a hitch, and I was riding the high when another fan stopped me on my way out. This time, it was a man, maybe mid-30s, with an easy smile and an arm draped around his girlfriend. "Hey, man," he said. "Your wife was hilarious at the bar. She should be on stage with you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not just because it confirmed my earlier suspicions, but because it was the second time a stranger had painted a picture of Laura I didn't recognize. A version of her I didn't know existed. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile. "She's definitely one of a kind." By the time I got home that night, my mind was a storm of questions. Why had she lied about where she was? Who was she spending time with? And most importantly, why didn't she feel she could tell me the truth? Laura was asleep when I walked into our bedroom, her chest rising and falling in the soft rhythm of slumber. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the woman I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. If I asked her outright, she'd deny it. I could already hear her voice in my head, brushing off my concerns with a laugh and a kiss. No, I needed proof, something solid to hold on to before I turned my world upside down. As I stood there in the darkness, one thing became painfully clear: the stage wasn't just my sanctuary anymore. It was the only place where I still felt like myself. Everywhere else, my life was starting to feel like a joke, one that I wasn't sure I was in on. And I wasn't laughing anymore. Weeks later, the tension in our home had grown so thick, it felt like a third presence in the room. Laura moved through our routines with the same familiar rhythm, making coffee in the morning, curling up with a book at night, but something was different. Her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes, and she always seemed one step ahead of me, like she was rehearsing for a role I didn't realize I'd cast her in. But it was her phone that tipped me off. It was always within reach, on the counter while she cooked, tucked under her pillow at night, clutched in her hand as she pretended to scroll aimlessly. She'd never been this attached to it before, and the sudden shift gnawed at me. "Work's been busy," she said one evening when I mentioned how distracted she seemed. "Emails, texts, you know how it is." I didn't know how it was. Laura worked part-time for a small boutique, hardly the kind of job that required her to respond to texts at 11 p.m. But I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, of course." Curiosity turned into obsession. I caught myself watching her when she wasn't looking, trying to decipher the meaning behind every glance, every text notification. It was driving me mad. I needed answers, but I wasn't ready to ask the questions. Then, one evening, fate, or maybe foolishness, intervened. Laura had just stepped into the shower, her phone abandoned on the nightstand. It was unlocked. My heart raced as I stared at it, the screen taunting me with the possibility of answers. "Don't do it," a voice in my head warned. "This won't end well." But the need to know overpowered the fear of what I might find. With trembling fingers, I picked it up and opened her messages. At first, I saw the usual chatter with friends and family. Then, tucked between group chats and innocuous texts about errands, was a thread with someone named Jason. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the thread. "It's probably nothing," I told myself. "Just a friend from work or an old classmate." But when I tapped on the messages, any illusion of innocence shattered. "Last night was unforgettable," Jason had written. "I can't stop thinking about the way you looked in that dress." My breath caught as I scrolled further. "Miss you already," another message read. "When can we meet again?" Her response was even worse: "Soon, I hope. I'll find a way. I always do." My stomach twisted into knots, the kind that left you gasping for air. The walls seemed to close in around me as the reality of what I was reading sunk in. Laura wasn't just lying about where she'd been, she was lying about who she was when I wasn't looking. I put the phone down as if it had burned me. The room spun, my thoughts racing in 1,000 different directions. Had it started recently? Had there been others before Jason? Was it something I did, or didn't do, that pushed her into his arms? I paced the house, my mind a storm of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. How could she look me in the eyes every day, share meals with me, laugh at my jokes, and carry on like nothing was wrong? Every memory we'd built together felt tainted, a beautiful picture splattered with ink. When Laura emerged from the bathroom, humming a tune and toweling off her hair, I froze. She looked so unbothered, so at ease, it made my skin crawl. How could she act so normal when everything was so far from it? "Hey," she said, flashing me that familiar smile. "What are you still doing up?" I couldn't sleep, I muttered, avoiding her gaze. "Well, don't stay up too late," she said, brushing past me. "You've got a big show tomorrow." She kissed me on the cheek, the gesture so automatic, it might as well have been a handshake. Then, she climbed into bed, slipping under the covers with the ease of someone who hadn't just shattered their partner's trust. I couldn't join her. Not yet. Not with the storm raging inside me. Instead, I sat in the living room, staring at the phone still sitting on the nightstand. I could confront her now, but the words wouldn't come. I wasn't ready. I needed more proof, more understanding, more time to figure out how to deal with the bombshell that had just detonated in my chest. So, I waited. Every interaction with her after that night felt like a performance. I watched her carefully, looking for cracks in her facade, clues to how far this betrayal extended. The thought of Jason's hands on her made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. I didn't want her to know I knew, not yet. At night, I lay awake beside her, replaying every moment in my head, trying to pinpoint where we had gone wrong. Was it my career? The late nights at clubs? The endless travel? Or had she simply grown tired of me, of the life we had built together? Days turned into weeks, and the weight of the secret I carried threatened to crush me. I still loved her, at least, the version of her I thought I knew. But now, every laugh, every kiss, every tender moment felt like a lie. I wasn't sure what hurt more, her betrayal, or the realization that I'd spent so long blind to it. The truth unraveled like a cruel joke, each new discovery twisting the knife deeper. It started with Jason, but as I dug deeper, I found more, names, messages, and photos that turned my stomach. Laura wasn't just having an affair, she was playing a game, using my growing popularity as a comedian to network with fans who admired more than just her charm. Jason was only the tip of the iceberg. There was Tom, a financial advisor who sent her flowers with notes like, "Counting down the days until I see you again." Then there was Evan, a younger guy who looked like he'd walked off the cover of a fitness magazine. Their messages dripped with flirtation and suggestive innuendo. And the worst part? Many of these rendezvous took place at my shows. While I was on stage pouring my heart out, making strangers laugh, she was in the shadows, making connections of a different kind. I uncovered a string of receipts, dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel bookings under her maiden name, even jewelry that never made its way into our home. It was like peeling back the layers of a beautiful painting to reveal a rotten canvas underneath. Every discovery fueled my anger, but it also solidified my resolve. I couldn't let this fester in silence. I needed answers, and I needed them now. One evening after dinner, I decided it was time to confront her. Laura was rinsing the dishes, humming softly to herself like everything was normal. I waited until she finished and turned to face me, wiping her hands on a towel. "Laura," I said, keeping my voice calm and measured. "Who's Jason?" Her smile faltered for a split second before she quickly recovered. "What do you mean?" she asked, feigning innocence. "You know exactly what I mean," I replied, crossing my arms. "Jason. The man you've been texting. The one you told last night was unforgettable. Care to explain that?" Her face went pale, the blood draining away so quickly I thought she might faint. But then, just as quickly, her expression hardened. You've been snooping through my phone, she snapped, her voice sharp with accusation. That's low, James. Really low. I laughed bitterly, the sound cold and foreign even to me. Not as low as lying to my face for months, I shot back. Not as low as sneaking around with other men while I'm out there working to build a life for us. Her anger flickered, replaced by something closer to desperation. It's not what you think, she said, stepping closer, her hands raised like she was calming a wild animal. Jason, it was nothing serious. Just some harmless flirting. Harmless? I echoed, my voice rising. Flirting is harmless. Meeting him in hotel rooms? That's something else entirely. She flinched but didn't deny it. Instead, she grabbed my arm, her grip tight and trembling. James, please, she begged. It didn't mean anything. I swear. I love you. It was just a distraction. A stupid mistake. I pulled my arm away, unable to stand her touch. A distraction. I repeated, my voice cracking under the weight of the words. How many distractions have there been, Laura? Because Jason isn't the only name I found. Her eyes widened, her lips parting as if to argue, but no sound came out. I saw the truth in her silence, there were others. I gave you everything, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I trusted you. I built my life around you. And this is what you do. You use my career, my fans, to. Stop, she interrupted, tears streaming down her face. Stop saying it like that. You don't understand. You're right, I snapped. I don't understand. So why don't you explain it to me? Explain why the woman I thought I knew, the woman I've spent my life loving, turned into a stranger. Her tears came harder now, her body shaking with sobs. I didn't mean for it to happen, she cried. It was just. I don't know. I felt invisible. You were always on the road, always busy, and I felt like I didn't matter anymore. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. You didn't matter. I repeated, incredulous. You were my everything, Laura. Every joke, every punchline, every story I told on stage, it was all you. She reached for me again, but I stepped back, shaking my head. Don't, I said firmly. Don't touch me. Please, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Don't do this. Don't let this ruin us. I'll make it right. I'll do whatever it takes. I laughed again, this time a hollow, humorless sound. You think we can just fix this? Like it's a broken vase or a flat tire. Laura, you didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. She fell to her knees, clutching at my legs, her sobs muffled against the fabric of my jeans. I'm sorry, she whispered over and over again. I'm so sorry. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to let my anger consume me. But instead, I stepped back, forcing her hands to release me. I have one condition, I said, my voice cold and steady. Stay out of my shows. Don't come to another performance, don't talk to my fans, don't even think about using my career as your playground again. She nodded frantically, her tears falling onto the floor. I promise, she said. I swear. Just, please, don't talk about this in your act. You can't destroy me like that. Her words hit me like a slap. Even now, with her betrayal laid bare, she was more concerned about her image than the damage she'd done to me. I stared at her for a long moment, my chest heaving with barely contained rage. Don't worry, I said finally, my voice dripping with contempt. I won't destroy you. But you've already destroyed us. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the floor. My heart felt like it was breaking in two, but there was one thing I knew for certain, Laura wasn't going to like what came next. When Laura begged me not to bring our issues into my act, I promised I wouldn't. I told her I'd leave it out of my routine, let her keep her dignity intact. And for weeks, I kept my word, at least, that's what she thought. But every lie she'd told, every betrayal I uncovered, churned inside me like a toxic brew. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was crafting it. A comedian's stage is their weapon, and I was preparing to wield mine with precision. The opportunity came at one of my biggest gigs yet, a sold-out show at a downtown theater. It was the kind of performance that could define a career. Laura insisted on coming, sitting in the front row as she always did, smiling that same saccharine smile that now made my stomach turn. I let her come. She had no idea the role she was about to play in the performance of my life. The room was electric that night, buzzing with energy. The spotlight warmed my face as I stepped onto the stage, the applause washing over me like a wave. For the first 20 minutes, I stuck to my usual material, observational humor about life, marriage, and the quirks of middle age. The crowd laughed easily, their faces lit with delight. Laura was right there, smiling and clapping along, the picture-perfect wife supporting her husband's career. I met her gaze once, and she beamed at me. If only she knew what was coming. I paused, letting the laughter settle, and took a sip of water. You know what they say about marriage? I began, pacing the stage. Trust is everything. The audience murmured in agreement. It was a familiar setup, the kind of line they expected to lead into a playful dig at spousal quirks. But this time, I took a different turn. But what happens when that trust is shattered? My tone dropped, my voice serious, almost somber. The shift in energy was palpable. The audience leaned in, sensing something raw beneath the surface. Laura stiffened, her smile faltering. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as she tried to gauge where I was going. I didn't look directly at her, I didn't need to. My focus was on the crowd, my accomplices for the night. Let me tell you a story, I said, pacing slowly. Imagine this, you're a comedian. You work nights, you travel a lot, but you love what you do because you've got this amazing partner at home. She's supportive, charming, the kind of woman who lights up a room. Everyone loves her. You've built your whole act around her because she's your muse, your anchor. Sounds pretty great, right? The audience nodded along, a few chuckles rippling through the crowd. Laura's hands were clasped tightly in her lap now, her smile frozen in place. But here's the twist, I continued, letting my voice harden. While you're out there making people laugh, your partner, your so-called anchor, is busy networking. Not for your career. Oh no, she's networking for herself. With your fans. She's trading intimacy for flattery, loyalty for a thrill. The room was dead silent. The kind of silence that hangs heavy, where every word feels like a pin drop in a cathedral. I didn't name her. I didn't have to. Imagine finding out that while you're on stage pouring your heart out, the person you trusted most is in the shadows, making connections. And not the professional kind. I paused, letting the words sink in. Imagine realizing that the life you thought you'd built together was just a stage, and you were the only one who didn't know it was an act. A wave of nervous laughter swept through the room, followed by scattered applause. Some people probably thought I was exaggerating, spinning a yarn for comedic effect. Others leaned forward, their eyes wide, sensing the truth behind the humor. I spotted Laura out of the corner of my eye. Her face was ghostly white, her hands gripping the edges of her seat like she was bracing for impact. She knew. She knew this wasn't just a joke. Now, here's the kicker, I said, my voice lightening just enough to soften the blow. You're supposed to keep going, right? Smile through it, make people laugh, pretend everything's fine. But let me tell you, nothing's funnier than the truth. The crowd erupted into laughter, their applause thunderous. I let the noise wash over me, my gaze finally landing on Laura. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't clapping. She was staring at me, her face a mask of anger and humiliation. I wrapped up the set with a few lighter jokes, giving the audience the closure they craved. They left the theater buzzing, oblivious to the real drama unfolding just beneath the surface. Laura stormed into the green room moments after I finished shaking hands with fans. Her face was a portrait of rage and humiliation, flushed red and tight with barely contained fury. She slammed the door so hard the walls rattled. "You promised," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the small space. "How could you do this to me?" I stood calmly by the mirror, dabbing at my face with a towel, letting her words hang in the air. Finally, I turned to her, my expression unflinching. "You made the punchline, Laura," I said, my voice low but firm. "I just delivered it." Her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You've humiliated me. In front of everyone." "No," I corrected, stepping closer. "You humiliated yourself. All I did was turn your betrayal into material. And you know what? It killed out there." Her mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time in our marriage, she seemed completely at a loss. "I trusted you," I continued, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. "I built my act, my life, around you. And you? You used me. My career. My fans. All for your own selfish thrill. You turned what we had into a joke." I took a breath, my jaw tightening. "So, I made you the punchline." Her expression wavered, flickering between anger and desperation. "James, please. We can fix this. It was just a mistake." I shook my head slowly. "No, Laura. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice." Repeatedly. The silence that followed was deafening. She stared at me, her tears finally spilling over, but I felt no sympathy. My heart had been broken long before tonight. She finally turned and left, slamming the door behind her. I exhaled deeply, the weight of her absence in the room oddly liberating. It wasn't joy I felt, just a quiet, somber relief. The next morning, I woke early and sat at the kitchen table, divorce papers spread out in front of me. I'd stayed up late signing them, making sure every I was dotted and every T crossed. I folded them carefully into an envelope, along with a handwritten note. "Laura, you took advantage of my trust, my career, and my love. I gave you the world, and you gambled it for temporary attention. Now, you're nothing more than a joke, mine." I left the envelope on the counter where she'd find it. I didn't wait to watch her read it. By the time she woke up, I was already gone, taking nothing but a suitcase and my laptop. It wasn't dramatic. It was clean, quiet, and final. In the weeks that followed, the story of the betrayed comedian became the highlight of my act. I refined it carefully, weaving the details into a narrative that had the audience roaring with laughter. You ever notice how the people you trust the most are the ones who cut the deepest? I'd say, pacing the stage. Here's a tip: if they start saying they love your fans, you should ask how many. The laughter was immediate, filling the room with a satisfying rumble. It became my signature bit, the one people asked for by name. Every laugh felt like a small victory, every applause a step toward reclaiming the life Laura had tried to tear apart. Laura tried calling a few times at first, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to venomous accusations. I didn't answer. What was there to say? She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. Eventually, the calls stopped. I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved out of state, leaving behind the life we'd built together. I didn't care. I had my own rebuilding to do. One night, months later, I stood backstage at another packed venue. My manager handed me a lineup of future gigs, all sold out, my name in bold at the top of the flyer. "Big night ahead," she said with a grin. "Your betrayed comedian bit is killing on social media. People can't get enough of it. I nodded, smiling faintly. It wasn't the kind of fame I'd dreamed of, but it was something. My pain had become my punchline, my heartbreak a shared laugh that brought strangers together. The show went off without a hitch. As I stepped off stage to thunderous applause, a fan approached, grinning ear to ear. "Man," he said, clapping me on the back, "that bit about your wife, pure gold. Who knew comedy could be so cathartic?" I laughed, a real one this time. "You'd be surprised what makes good material," I said, shaking his hand. As I walked away, I couldn't help but think, Laura was right about one thing. She'd made me a better comedian. Just not in the way either of us had imagined. What about you? Do you think my revenge was enough, or would you have taken it a step further?